Answered in kind. 66. The gentle architecture of unforced power. There exists a peculiar temptation among those who perceive interconnection everywhere. The urge to articulate the entire constellation at once. One star is named, and suddenly the whole sky ignites. One corridor is opened, and behind it waits an endless procession of adjoining chambers, each whispering, "Include me, too." But transmission is not accumulation. To speak effectively is not to unload the totality of what one sees. It is to calibrate revelation to capacity, not merely intellectual capacity, but emotional bandwidth, nervous system tolerance, existential readiness. There is a difference between illumination and inundation. The former liberates, the latter overwhelms. If the animating impulse beneath speech is freedom, true interior emancipation, then force becomes an incoherence. One cannot coerce another into sovereignty. One cannot batter someone into awakening. To attempt such a thing is to contradict the very architecture of liberation one intends to offer. There is a rhythm to authentic transmission. It is not frenetic. It is not desperate. It does not strain to penetrate defenses already electrified. When the psyche fortifies itself, when its gates clang shut and the drawbridge lifts, pressing harder does not produce insight. It produces entrenchment. Pressure begets resistance. Resistance tightens knots. Knots cinch when pulled. Thus, discernment becomes the quiet art. Not everyone standing within earshot is listening from the same interior terrain. Some stand in the tender aftermath of fear, merely attempting to survive their own thoughts. Others dwell in elaborate conceptual fortresses constructed of doctrine and certainty, mistaking rigidity for strength. Some observe from the skeptical periphery, grain of salt in hand, wary, but curious. And some, luminous and restless, pace the edges of their own potential, seeking corridors not yet charted. To speak as though all these nervous systems are one is to fracture coherence. Instead, power refines itself by choosing a register, not exclusion, but precision, not favoritism, but attunement. A single current, cleanly directed, travels farther than 5 diluted streams competing for primacy. There is also the matter of force, that subtle migration from offering to insistence. One feels it in the body before the mind confesses it. The breath shortens. The jaw sets. The phrase is recorded again and again and again. Not because it lacks clarity, but because it carries attachment. The speaker begins striving to secure reception rather than simply transmitting signal. This is the moment when the current is abandoned for effort. Effort has its place. Skill is honed through repetition, Articulation improves through refinement. Cadence strengthens through practice. Raising one's ceiling incrementally, daily, expands capacity. But there is a distinction between elevating skill and escalating force. The former builds musculature, the latter exhausts vitality. Unforced power does not clamor. It does not advertise itself with spectacle. It does not flatten its own dimensionality for the sake of immediate comprehension. It understands containment. It knows that depth need not declare itself loudly in order to be felt. In fact, what is most potent often appears unassuming, almost ordinary, until proximity reveals an inexplicable density, a gravity that rearranges atmospheres without announcement. Mystery, then, is not withholding, it is stewardship. To articulate everything is to reduce it. To leave some corridors unopened is to preserve their architecture. Partial revelation does not betray truth. It honors pacing. The sentence, "There is more, but this is sufficient for now," is not an evasion. It is calibration. Relief accompanies it because the body recognizes coherence restored. When transmission emerges from coherence, it carries resonance, and resonance requires no coercion. Those attuned will recognize it, not because they are instructed to, but because something within them vibrates in sympathetic accord. Recognition is not manufactured, it is evoked. One might imagine that to care deeply about others necessitates intensity, but intensity, when misapplied, becomes abrasion. There are gentle souls whose thresholds for force are narrow. They retreat, not from truth, but from its aggressive packaging. If one's aspiration is to liberate rather than dominate, then the vessel must remain permeable. Strength need not roar. It can hum. It is also wise to remember that corridors close for reasons. Defensive architectures are rarely arbitrary. They are built to preserve psychological survival. To attempt demolition from the outside is to be mistaken for an invader. Far more efficacious is to leave the door unbattered, the light on, the path visible, and to depart when asked. To withdraw without rancor is a profound act of respect. It communicates without proclamation, "Your sovereignty is intact. I will not trespass." And, paradoxically, such non-intrusion often lingers more powerfully than insistence ever could. Ponder that. Growth, when sincere, compounds. One may revisit earlier expressions and perceive not embarrassment, but evolution. Increased precision, greater equilibrium, subtler nuance. This is not evidence of prior deficiency. It is testimony to continuity. Refinement is not repudiation. It is maturation. The practice of speaking, daily, repeatedly, builds fluency not merely of language, but of alignment. The mind may see webs of infinite association, but the body discerns what can be carried without distortion. When these two enter coherence, the resulting transmission feels less like construction and more like flow. And in flow, there is no desperation to reach everyone. One speaks to the consciousness willing to engage. One releases the outcome. Seeds scatter. Some germinate unseen. Some are watered intentionally. Some lie dormant until conditions shift. The sower is not responsible for the weather. It is worth noting that empowerment in its truest form is not the conferral of strength, but the remembrance of it. To remind another of their intrinsic capacity is categorically different from attempting to install it. One does not fabricate their power, one mirrors it, and mirrors do not shout. There is a temptation, especially amid rapid growth, to perfect each offering before release, to achieve some imagined 100% fidelity. Yet, often the difference between 85% and 100% is not integrity, but perfectionism's whisper. The living current rarely demands immaculate packaging. It demands sincerity. An imperfect but alive transmission may liberate more than a flawless but strained one. Thus, the art resolves into balance. Refinement without rigidity. Intensity without aggression. Mystery without obscurity. Conviction without coercion. Unforced power is neither timid nor domineering. It is self-possessed. It understands that worth is not indexed to performance, that ability does not confer superiority, and that influence need not be theatrical to be transformative. There will always be those who cannot or will not hear. Their corridors remain closed. This is neither failure nor indictment. It is variance. One leaves them in peace, not as dismissal, but as respect, trusting that sovereignty includes the right to refuse. And one continues, not blasting, not striving desperately, not compressing the infinite into a single exhale, but offering steadily, raising the ceiling by degrees, honoring the body's calibration, preserving the gentle architecture of freedom. For in the end, liberation cannot be forced into another's hands. It would be beside the point, don't you think? It can only be placed within reach, luminous, uncoerced, and left there, waiting for the moment someone decides to claim what was always theirs.